In 1946, playwright Arthur Miller wrote a play called All My Sons, a three-act play that places primary characters Joe and Steve Keller at the center of the enigmatic consequences of their own actions. So in short, their attempt to chase the American dream during wartime saw them selling defective airplane parts to the military, specifically engines with cracked cylinders. Steve would be imprisoned and Joe would be released, but knowing that he had shared the same guilt because their actions resulted in a cavalcade of aircraft disasters during combat, specifically the deaths of 21 pilots. Now, if that phrase sounds familiar, you're right. Tyler Joseph of the band, also called 21 Pilots, will tell you that their name was chosen specifically because of the consequential weight of the story and how ignoring peripheral dangers in the pursuit of selfish and short-sighted goals can literally kill other people. In the play, we come to find out that one of those 21 pilots was Joe's own son, sacrificed on the altar of acquisition. But is there a non-fictional version of this? Well, there certainly is. A man with similar goals, and it killed 39 people at a minimum, which trumps the fictional Keller brothers by at least 18 souls. You see a diary composed by Irish immigrant Patrick Breen, written between November 20th of 1846 all the way through March 1st of 1847, chronicled the ordeal of one of the most high-profile ordeals of the human experience. And that is the Donner Party. Patrick Breen was a migrant traveling with his wife and 7 children who all managed to survive what was known to be a frozen hell. His diary records the descent into madness, balkanization, and even the most notorious aspect of the story, the page 28 acknowledgement that men and women alike were, at best, cannibalism adjacent. Any abject deep dive into the story will ultimately make the cannibalism aspect of it almost a subtext. It's the entrapment, the trauma, the hopelessness, the wilderness silence, and the constantly ebbing sense of hope from day to day. People forced to eat their pets, people watching their loved ones die, all of that. The entropic proof that hell can be a frozen penitentiary as much as it can be a Stygian pit of flame prepared for the devil and his angels. Breen's diary is the real-time snapshot of the ground zero torment. But it was another book that potentially led them there in the first place. Is it possible that a travel book written by a fabulous Yankee with a penchant for influencing giant population shifts led them into perdition? Well, in a way, yes. Let's just say his Facebook page would read, "In a complicated relationship with unvetted terrain and truncated travel routes." Today we'll talk about Lansford W. Hastings on box number 7. So Lansford Hastings was born in Mount Vernon, Ohio, a descendant of Thomas Hastings, who came from East Anglia in England to the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1634. Hastings would find his formative years of gainful employment as an attorney, and it was within the confines of this world that a symbiotic relationship between litigation and ambition would take root. Hastings wasn't content to sit idle in one town, and traveling, it turned out, would be in his blood. So in 1842, he headed to Oregon, and while there would find himself in the employment of a client, a one Dr. John McLaughlin, and he prepared his land claim near Willamette Falls and also helped in surveying Oregon City in the state of Oregon, which would become, of course, the first incorporated city west of the Rocky Mountains. So in the spring of 1843, Hastings relocated to Alta, California, a sparsely populated province of Mexico, and it was here that in 1844 that the reverberations of Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase may have provided a significant psychological influence. For in 1844, Hastings hatched a rather ambitious plan. He was going to find a way to wrest California from Mexico and establish an independent Republic of California, placing himself into a literal sort of presidential or monarchical or prime ministerial position. Hastings' plans were logistical and not militaristic in design, so he was hoping to cause a westward influx of people to supplant the sitting population to effect a bloodless revolution. In order to do that, though, he needed to create an impetus or a reason, a clarion call for people to pick up their lives and head into the unknown. Hastings would simply add the title of pamphleteer to his ever-growing list of resume dots, and in 1845, he would publish a book called The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. A book that would describe California in nearly irresistible terms. But it would be a singular passage that would become the inflection point for one of the West's most notorious moments, and whether fairly or unfairly, would permanently damage the legacy of a man that has never been fully redeemed. So while encouraging emigration, he wrote, "The most direct path would be the Oregon route, about 200 miles east of Fort Hall, thence bearing west-southwest to the Salt Lake, and thence continuing down to the Bay of San Francisco." This was B from his book, page 137, flowing into 138. So this mildly vague passage would become known as the Hastings Cutoff and was reputed to shave off nearly 400 miles of a journey, something that definitely would have appealed to the weary traveler, especially in those days. I don't even like driving today. Well, there was only one problem with this. Hastings wrote this statement before he had actually traveled the entire route himself and was unaware of the difficulties crossing what was known as the Wasatch Range and the Salt Flats in western Utah. His only actual experience with the route was a portion from Salt Lake City to Fort Bridger, which he did A, in mild weather, B, without time constraints, and C, he never visited the desert portion of the route ever. But actually, there was a second problem. Hastings was already a renowned traveler, and the mass acceptance of his expertise and reputational inertia front-loaded the confidence of many who would have been otherwise reluctant to hedge their bets on a trip this long. When word got out that Hastings' overland route was faster and better than any other, numerous parties cut bait at home, packed up their stuff, and split for Cali. And this would be the spark that lit the fuse for the Donner and Reed party disaster. They were initially supposed to meet Hastings at a rallying point in Black's Fort, but their phlegmatic plans placed them behind schedule, and Hastings left with the ones that made it, attempting to leave notes behind as they went along. And in the spring of 1846, the group had departed Independence, Missouri. The journey to the west usually took 4 to 6 months, and it was assumed to be in the bag as a shorter route. So the party slowed their procession down, assuming that the Hastings Cutoff was going to make up the difference for them. The desolate and rugged terrain and the difficulties they later encountered while traveling along the Humboldt River in present-day Nevada resulted in the loss of many cattle and a number of wagons, which caused divisions and schisms that formed within the group. So by the time the group hit the Sierra Nevadas, a combination of the group's assumptive lethargy coupled with inclement weather conditions would find them trapped in a cold snap of cataclysmic proportions near Truckee Lake, which is now referred to as Donner Lake for, well, I would say obvious reasons. The machinations of what happened, the real-time horrors, the wails, the cries, the desperations are details for another podcast and another day. I recommend George Stewart's book, Ordeal by Hunger, if you ever want to live this thing in real time. But today, we're just going to have to settle for my rogue synopsis. But essentially, the party of 87 people would hunker down and hope for a break. And by December, some of the group set out on foot to get help, and a rescue party from California wouldn't make it back into the encampment until all the way into February. And by then, only 48 people would have survived. So you do the math on what happened. Not all of it happened during the deluge, but most of it did. And people did eat other people to survive. Two dynamics, though, emerge from the story. One, the errant information published widely that led a series of wagons and horses into the void with nothing suppressed or vetted, based on the testimony of a reigning, alleged expert. An expert publishing disinformation. A confidence game that killed other people. I don't think I've ever heard of that before. Just kidding. The other was information that was possibly suppressed. Journalist Edwin Bryant was a part of the Black Forks Party that managed to see the first part of the trails. He was aware that the wagon heavy loads of the Donner Party and he attempted to warn them by leaving a set of letters for them, and he returned all the way back to Black's Fork just to let them know that their wagons would most likely be compromised on a trail misleadingly described as smooth. The problem is these letters were apparently circumvented by Jim Bridger, who owned a trading post along the route, and it is presumed that he had the letters suppressed to maintain a steady flow of mercantile transactions. Mendacious? Probably not, but certainly wrong and unethical and definitely immoral. But he probably had no idea the carnage and fallout that was coming because of these omissions. But where does this leave our esteemed pamphleteer, Lansford W. Hastings, in the historical canon? Well, first of all, his plans for California dominance fell between the floorboards when California was conquered by the United States during the Mexican-American War. In 1848, Mexico ceded California to the United States under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So Hastings' dreams of establishing a sovereign republic were gone, and he served as a captain during that war, and after it ended, Hastings again took up the practice of law. He married Charlotte Toller in 1848 and was also a delegate to the 1849 California Constitutional Convention. This man was really, really, really interested in obtaining and governing California. In the late 1850s, he moved his family to Yuma, Arizona, where he served as postmaster as a territorial judge. And during the Civil War, Hastings sided with the South, surprisingly enough. Now, this is somewhat paradoxical to many as to why, as his upbringing had no Southern calibration and most likely stemmed from the recent idea that pulling California into the Union was a damper on his own plans for the state. And in 1864, he traveled to Richmond, Virginia, where he met Confederate President Jefferson Davis to gain his support for a plan to, get this, separate California from the Union and unite it with the Confederacy. Not probably because he had any particular passions for the Confederacy, but you know what they say, the devil of my devil is my friend. Hastings must have presented a huge wake of gravitas to Jefferson Davis because upon meeting him, President Davis promoted Hastings to the rank of major almost immediately to the Confederate States Army and placed him in charge of assembling a military unit in Arizona with the aim of, yes, defending California. So what this would become called the Hastings Plot would, however, die on the vine as the war ended early in the very next year. So here we have two cataclysmically large malfunctions on the world stage: the Hastings cutoff and the Hastings plot. These alone should be enough to throttle a man's dreams, no? Well, Hastings beat feet for South America, where disgruntled Confederate soldiers decided to pitch their tents in Brazil. Unsurprisingly, Hastings managed to start negotiations with the Brazilian government. And you will be surprised to find out it wasn't about California. But you may not be surprised to know that in 1867, Hastings, he penned another travel pamphlet, coincidentally titled The Emigrant's Guide to Brazil. Now, I have no idea if he managed to proclaim routes deemed to be more advantageous, but I'm going to guess he most likely led emigrants right through the middle of the favelas, where they were promptly mugged, stabbed, and left for dead. Just kidding. I have no idea what he did in that book. Ultimately, Hastings would wind up in the Virgin Islands at St. Thomas and die of yellow fever while conducting a shipload of settlers to his colony at Santarém. All in all, Lansford W. Hastings was a colorful guy with a myriad of skills, interests, and an almost sociopathic need to galvanize populations under his own hegemonic leadership. And had he actually tested out his own shortcut across Utah, he might have actually pulled it off, and the Donner Party would not be relegated to culinary punchlines and wintertime infamy. And that's it. This is box number 7.